I think one thing you can certainly say is that the weather is interesting here, and the changes are relatively gentle, but they continuously impel us to adapt, and you can't resist the weather, you have to adapt to it, flow with it. And that may be some further clue to the nature of the Celtic mystical imagination and poetry, that they were so observant and so able to enjoy whatever form of nature manifested itself, whatever kind of weather they were in. And our way of adapting to external circumstances, to the events of our lives, to the discoveries or the losses of our life, really underlies our whole journey of human development. If we are conditioned and trained, as many are today, in a sort of consumer spirituality or consumer view of life, which is that it has only good things to offer us if we have enough to resources to get them, then we're only going to achieve a very limited degree of reality. We're always going to be resisting what does not at first seem attractive. Well, see, the weather's completely changed now. Well, that bit of it has. I'm very conscious at the moment because my roof is on, but my roofer is still relying upon my prayers to keep the weather good. I think he's a very high estimate of my spiritual power, because we had such a good weather yesterday when he took the roof off and put the basic one on. So anyway, adapting, and not only adapting, but also finding the meaning in the light and the shade, in the good and the bad, in the losses as well as in the discoveries and celebrations. And an integrated life means a life in which the inner life recognizes and participates in the external dimension as well, that we sense a complementarity, we sense a relationship between the inner and the outer movements. They're different, of course. The inner movements of our soul and our inner journey over time are more subtle. They're not as sudden, usually, apart from our moods and our mental states. But the inner geography is less dramatic than external events very often. And the mystical tradition, for this reason, encourages a full acceptance of the material, the physical world, and of our emotional world, and of our psychological states. That to be spiritual does not mean to be selective and dismissive, to only select the spiritual or the religious, which is how it often happens for some people, and to reject the physical or the material. The mystical tradition is a very integrated view of life. Contemplative tradition in Christianity, for that reason, was often in tension with the institutional. But the mystical consciousness encourages both acceptance and the integration of opposites. So when we find things changing, we go from one mood to another, for example, or one way of perceiving the world to another, or we go from one state of happiness and contentment to one of loss or suffering. Mystical wisdom urges us to both accept and integrate these extremes or these opposites. God is the union of opposites in the Christian mystical tradition. And this is, of course, something that happens deeper than at the mental consciousness. It's not just about thinking or talking or resolving it at a conceptual level. This is why it's important to have a sense of the stages of the journey which unfolds deeper than our conscious ability to observe it. And it's also why we need good advice, good guidance, good directions right from the beginning. It's important that our spiritual journey starts off pointing in the right direction, and we're given some basic instructions. After that, we have to learn very largely by ourselves, but we learn within a learning community as well. If you think of what that means just in terms of meditation, how important it is that we're introduced to meditation as a simple and serious practice, and we're told both of what it can bring us to and what it costs, what a spiritual discipline like this means. If we don't hear that from the beginning, we may focus only on one aspect of it, on the benefits that we're going to get as a result of it. We have to be told, don't be discouraged by your distractions. Identify and let go of your perfectionism, which is going to turn meditation into a technique or into something you can evaluate. And don't be discouraged by your periodic lack of enthusiasm, your lack of zeal, what the Desert Fathers recognized as a chadia. Very often we become discouraged because we're discouraged. But you can be encouraged by your discouragement if you're clever enough. Well, you recognize it. You recognize that this is the state you're in, and you are in a learning community, called it a tradition, that says, yes, well, did you really expect to be walking on cloud 9 forever? You know? Did you think you'd never have an argument with your boyfriend or girlfriend? You know? Or your spouse? Did you think the sun was always going to shine? Mm-hmm. Well, if you did, you're welcome to reality. So you are going to be discouraged at times, and recognize that, and recognize it's not going to last forever. And you can work through it. And actually, it's not just enduring it and putting up with it and getting through it, but it's also about growing through it. The first chapter of the letter of St. James says, be happy, or be grateful even, I think it says, for all kinds of troubles and obstacles that come your way, because you can grow through these. You don't become a good sailor on calm seas. It doesn't say that, but other people say that. So, and don't be frightened of the dark. We'll come back to this in a minute, because the symbol of night and the symbol of darkness is a very important one in mystical poetry and imagination. We find it throughout, from the Celts on. This union of opposites, this integration of the good and the bad, of the light and the shade, is a result of concentration. Not just of willpower, not just of thinking, although a certain amount of grit and determination, a certain amount of character, just to persevere, needs to be developed. It's a good way of developing that aspect of personality that allows us to endure, to be resilient. One of the weaknesses of a lot of contemporary psychology is a lack of resilience, a lack of muscle almost, or tone in our spiritual muscle or psychological muscle, to be able to put up with difficult transitions or losses. So we need a certain amount of willpower, we need a certain amount of understanding, and again that's where the learning community that we belong to is so enriching and necessary. But the actual integration is a result of what we could call concentration. If you think of concentration just as an act of the will, it will just give you a headache, and it will make you tired. And people sometimes come to meditation with a very strong will and determination, and they are determined to say the mantra continuously if it kills them. And so they end up, they sit there with their brows furrowed like that, as if they're sitting in the dentist chair, and at the end of it they'll say, oh, the meditation isn't doing anything for me. So we have to understand what concentration means. Being one with the center, being with the center. And it is actually a result of attention. It's one of the reasons why meditation, which is essentially the work of attention, improves our concentration in daily life. Students find this, and everybody else finds it in their work, or generally in their ability to stay focused, whether it's on a television program you're watching, or a book you're reading, or a conversation you're having, or a project that you're involved in. So the concentration is not so much the means as a side effect of this work of attention. And if you think of the difference between the two, it's like listening to a piece of music that you love, that touches you, moves you strongly, and or listening perhaps to a piece of music that you have to analyze, or reading a complicated insurance, what they're called, insurance certificates, policies that you have to read all the small print in and really concentrate on it, analyze it. So that's the difference. Attention is an attraction, and a sustained attraction to what ultimately delights us, or brings us to delight. It's joyful. This is why we learn through joy. Something that seems to be missing in most of our school systems today. The joy of learning is the medium, really, of acquiring knowledge and skills. So, in meditation, we are paying attention, and as a result of that attention, work done morning and evening, we find that our minds become more focused, more centered, more concentrated. And the reason that this happens is simply because in the work of meditation, the work of attention, the work of the mantra, we are taking the attention off ourselves. We are diminishing the level of egoism or egocentricity, which normally grips us and absorbs most of our energy, most of our available energy of consciousness. It's a bit like, when you get a new computer, it's great because it works very quickly and it's on top of all the programs that you've got. And after you've had it for a year or so, it begins to get sluggish, begins to slow down. And you need to take it into someone who will, I don't know what they do, they clear it, clear the memories, or they reset it. Because over time, the memory of the computer just gets silted up with everything that it's been doing, and leaves a kind of a spectral presence of all its own activity, which takes up, not obvious space, but takes up space in the working system. So in the same way, when we meditate, you could say, we are at one mechanical level simply, clearing the memory of unnecessary material or unnecessary attachments. What is an attachment except a kind of unconscious memory? We get hooked on something, some memory, some experience, some hope, some fantasy, some anxiety, and it absorbs our energy. Meister Eckhart said this about the soul: for her inward work to be effective, she must call in all her powers and gather them from the diversity of things to a single inward activity. For her inward work to be effective, she must call in all her powers and gather them from the diversity of things to a simple inward activity. So we have to move from the distractedness of Martha to the simplicity of Mary. But this work, for this work to be effective and to come to a simple inward activity, you must drop all other works, he said in another sermon. You must drop all other works and you must come to an unknowing. So this is why the mind reacts against the work of meditation, because it seems as if it is going to be unproductive. It's not going to solve our problems. It's not going to help us tick all the boxes that make us feel reassured. We've ticked all the boxes, we've got our shopping list, and we haven't forgotten anything. The mind doesn't understand unknowing. And so we have to rely upon a deeper wisdom or a deeper intuition than our ordinary rational mental mind activity in order to make the commitment to meditation. And then, of course, the effectiveness of this inward activity makes itself known to us, becomes obvious to us. We'll look at this in a moment. We look at the spiritual fruits. Experience is your teacher, Saint John Cassian says. So although we are in this learning community, which can give us a great deal inspiration, the right direction from the beginning, and support at crucial moments of our journey, and the spiritual friendship we need in order to get there. In the end, it also relies upon our own solitary experience, the experience that cannot be replicated and packaged and delivered. It has to be discovered. This experience has to be discovered for ourselves. As John Main says, in your own experience. And then this also is what what Meister Eckhart says. Receiving this power, remember what we were sharing last night in the Lectio on St. Patrick's breastplate, the prayer of St. Patrick. That sense we all had of the power that filled those lines, those words, and his own celebration, really, or his own wonder at the immense power of Christ that he had felt at all these different levels of prayer, and ranging from his experience of nature to his contemplation of the mysteries of the gospel life of Jesus, to his struggle with the dark forces, and so on. In each of these aspects, he had discovered the power of Christ, which he bound unto himself. I bind unto myself today and every day the strong name of the Trinity. So, and that power, dynamos, it is an energy. It's not an idea. It's an event or an encounter, an experience, we would say. So, receiving this power in the Son and through the Son, Jesus, the Spirit waxes mighty in everything it undertakes. So every work that we are involved in, every concern we carry with us, all our relationships and commitments are directly benefit from this infusion of power. So that neither joy nor sorrow, nor anything God has created in time, can destroy us. But he stands mightily there, as if with divine power. So the things that usually drain us, or discourage us, or disempower us, no longer have that power over us. They are, we can face them in the power, in a higher power. I was talking to somebody the other day who's just close that door. Who is works in addiction therapy, and he said something like 85% of people who break an addiction acknowledge some form of higher power. 85% is pretty good, and something like 70% continue, in their new life, free of that addiction, with a sense that they are connected to this higher power. John of the Cross has given us one of the great metaphors of the Christian mystical tradition in what he calls the nights of the soul, the night of the senses, first of all, and then the night of the spirit. And he calls them nights, not really because the night is a negative symbol. I don't know if you have ventured out of your little cottages here on Bear Island at night to look at the sky or just to hear the sounds, feel the air. And I hope you have, because it's very different from night in a city. And many people are scared of the night, scared of darkness. And as we were saying yesterday about a lot of traditional religion is motivated really by being protected against the dark forces, and which are released, seem to be in their imagination released at night. And it's interesting, just as the labyrinth, the pre-Christian labyrinth, was seen as an ordeal that the hero had to endure, which culminated in his slaying the Minotaur, this ferocious and dark, half human, half beast, that had its lair in the center of the labyrinth. When the Christian imagination visited this symbol, it saw it in the light of the resurrection and said, well, Christ has slain the Minotaur of death. And therefore the labyrinth is no longer a frightening symbol, and finding our way to the center is not a dark ordeal that is going to lead to, a life and death struggle, but it's actually life. It's actually breaking through into the life that Jesus has opened up. So it's a very different, it's the same symbol, but seen very differently. So in the same way, I think John of the Cross uses the image of night to describe aspects or stages of our spiritual journey. He uses them positively. But he says, in fact, we call them night because in both these stages of the night of the soul, the soul journeys in darkness as by the night. The mind cannot understand what is happening in the early stages, anyway, of our practice of meditation. So it is as if it is in darkness. It cannot explain the necessity or the mechanism or the process of the meditation. He actually speaks about 3 nights, which he says correspond to early evening, midnight, and dawn. In the first night, he says we experience a privation, a deprivation of all sensible appetite for worldly things. And I don't know if you've ever experienced that. I hope you have. It doesn't mean that you sell up everything and take to the road, but it means, it can mean different things to different people, of course, in the circumstances of their life, but they are no longer driven only by ambition or worldly success. I mean, in my case, after I did the 6-month retreat with Father John at the first meditation centre, it helped me a lot, immensely. It was a hard time for me, for coming to self-knowledge and facing my own demons and so on. And at the end I thought, well, thank God this is over. Now I can get back to my career in journalism. And then to my horror, really, I discovered I wasn't attracted to that anymore. It had just gone. It was like, this kind of, some eros impulse had just died, faded. And it calls for a re-evaluation of your values when that happens. Because at first you might think, well, I don't want to do anything with my life. It's the first feeling you might have, because your values were so strongly conditioned and defined for you by society, by your education, by your parents, by your peers, your friends, by the people, by your career, people your professional colleagues and so on. So at first it might seem as if something has drained out of you some ability to life or engage with life. And that's one of the reasons, actually, that people, I think, do dismiss meditation even before they've tried it, because they sense that this might be what happens, something like this might happen. It's like there are certain fundamentalists who say that meditation is dangerous, because if you blank out your mind, it always amuses me that they think you can just blank out your mind so easily, that you blank out your mind, and then that's really dangerous because the devil will come in, and a whole load of demons will come in. What's actually happening, of course, is that the demons are coming out, and you're throwing light on them, and like little insects and things that scurry around in the dark corners, you throw light on them, and you can deal with them then. Anyway, so I remember being in my house here once a couple of years ago, and I was sitting quietly reading one evening, and then I heard this sound of little scurrying feet above me, and it was running from one end of the room to the other, and it's not a nice feeling to have an unexpected and undesired guest, especially when you can't see them and identify them. And so I calculated that it was actually above the ceiling, but below the floor above, so it somehow it got in there. And if you let your imagination run away with you, you would have all sorts of nightmares, because you don't know what it is. Anyway, fortunately, it found its way out, because it has never come back. I hope. Anyway, so blanking out our mind or doing the work of meditation, or entering into poverty of spirit, is what it means, is allowing these little creatures that have got trapped, these little creatures of memory or attachments, which have become exaggerated in their importance because we don't know what they are, because they're in the unconscious. And we think the worst of them. We let them out, and we are free with them, and then you look at them and you say, what was all the fuss about? So anyway, in this first stage of the journey, what he calls the early evening, is when we begin to shift from an excessive concentration upon external activity, let's put it like that, worldly ambition, an excessive focus upon achieving things externally or materially or socially, to a work that is going to cleanse and purify and clarify us. And as I say, that doesn't mean that you have to sell up everything and take to the road or but it means you will re-evaluate the inner and the outer aspects of your life. The external values, the decisions that you take will be more effectively controlled by inner experience and not only by external expectations or external values. Then at midnight, in this picture, at midnight, he says, faith, as far as the intellect is concerned, seems like a dark night. You just don't see what's happening. And there is, by now, in the journey that we're on, a commitment, and faith is about personal commitment and about, rather than belief. Faith is about persevering in the relationships or the projects or the people that we have committed ourselves to. But there are points in that commitment where we don't even know why we're doing it. Because we may feel as if we're not getting anything out of it. We don't know whether we're going to the left or the right, or up or down. We just have to take the next step. Do the next thing that is the right thing to do. Even though we don't know where it's going to take us, all we can say is, it is the right thing to do now as far as I can see. And this is a space in our understanding where we don't have a 5-year plan. People say to us sometimes in the community, we talk to somebody who's got good organizational skills and which we need, and they will say, now where do you want to be with the community in 5 years' time and in 25 years' time? Where do you want to be? I don't know. I think we have to try to answer that question, certainly for people who want to help us, and it's probably good to try to answer it, but it isn't the answer. The answer is the next step we take, and into which we give our full and unconditional consent. So at this stage, in this dimension of the journey of faith, it's midnight, as far as the predictive understanding is concerned, as far as we can predict things. And then St. John of the Cross says the dawn moment is, it is never so dark as just before dawn. The dawn moment, he says, is where God himself seems a dark night in this life. And all the stuff we say about God, all the consoling religious language, all the images of God, that help us, or help other people, are not, it isn't that they become false, but you just, you hold them in the dark, rather than seeing really what they are, what they're like, or why we're holding them. This is why it's very important, I think, and something that the fathers and the Celtic Christians were able to communicate so powerfully, and that we benefit from understanding through them, is that prayer is not about making a 5-year plan and telling God what his or her role in this 5-year plan is, or presenting a 5-year plan to God and saying, we'd like to submit this for your approval. That's really not what prayer is, and it's not about a 5-minute plan almost. It's not about saying, you know, I have to keep my fingers crossed as I say this, please don't let it rain today because I'm finishing off my roof. Praying itself is good in itself, as Origen says. We do not pray in order to get benefits from God, but to become like God. Praying itself is good. And we have to enter into the pure prayer of meditation. Meditation will teach us what prayer is. We have to enter into the pure prayer of meditation with this absolute and unconditional commitment that it is good in itself. And I'm not doing it because I want to relax, or to reduce stress, or deal with depression, or help with panic attacks, or anxiety, or irritability, or violence, self-harming, with poor memory, to help me with anger control, to help with my self-esteem, to deal with my insomnia, to help me get through addiction, to help me with human relationships, to help me deal with chronic pain, to give me a better chance to get through cancer, to help me if I get heart disease, and to help me if I have chronic fatigue. All of those things are good. And we should encourage those benefits. And we wish those benefits to ourselves and to other people. And in an unbalanced society, in which these problems and diseases are so rampant, we need to address them and to find a way to deal with them, obviously. And we should not pretend that, we should be grateful that meditation has these benefits. That isn't why we meditate. It may be why we start to meditate, or it may be why some people meditate, and we can't judge. We shouldn't judge. But I think even if you do practice meditation just for these desired results, it's going to bring you into another level of understanding, or another level of your own journey, in which you will begin to glimpse, and many people who've been through AA, for example, will say this: I started the recovery, the 12 steps, just in order to to get off the drink. Then I realized I was on a spiritual path. And I think the same is true for meditation. I started to meditate because I was suffering from depression, or because I was getting panic attacks and so on, or my cholesterol needed control and the doctor. But I continue knowing that it is leading to an integration, a wholeness, which perhaps is what we mean by spiritual, they would sometimes say. Maybe this is what spirit means. Praying itself is good. If we can come to meditation from that point, we are fortunate. And it's coming to it with that simple and unconditional acceptance of whatever happens, light or shade, good weather or bad weather, what John Main calls the two presences of God. Sometimes you will feel the presence of God very strongly, the joy and the peace and the well-being and the dynamism of life, and this mysterious, non-intrusive presence of God. As I think James Allison says, when God comes into the room, he doesn't move the furniture. Doesn't take up space in the room. It's just there, and it changes everything. But not because he's saying, excuse me, you have to get out of the way, I want to sit there. So that's one aspect of the experience of God. The other, as John Main points out, is the feeling of God's absence. That God is not in the room of our life. That there is a sense of aridity or of loss or of expectancy with no time set for that expectation to be or need to be met. And actually God is in both. These are two presences, two forms of the presence and activity of God. If we understand the journey as this journey of integration and acceptance. And of course what this also means is that the whole of this process is a transformation of desire. Everything that we understand by desire and the value we give to desire as part of our motivational life has to be re-evaluated. We are creatures of desire. We can't stop desiring things. From a cup of coffee, which we all desire now, to love, fulfillment, security, peace of mind, good health, well-being for ourselves and those we love. So we are creatures of desire, and that's not a bad thing. But the process of the journey that the Celtic monks took and inspire us to take involves a transformation of desire. We will experience desire differently. We will be free from addiction to desire, and for that reason we will experience the fulfillment of desire with greater joy and delight, simply because it is no longer compulsive or obsessive. And we will see that the satisfaction of all desires that Thomas Aquinas says as one of the aspects of the vision of God is achieved. We come to that satisfaction of all desire through the fulfilling and the transcendence of desire. Once the transformation of desire has started. In other words, you want something very much. You think your life is going to be incomplete and inadequate without it. And you have to allow that desire to be transformed. Then it is fulfilled, if it's necessary for it to be fulfilled. Then it will be fulfilled, and then you move on. And that, I think, is how the transformation of desire rolls over throughout our journey, and eventually, we hope, brings us to this satisfaction of all desires.